to express my gratitude to my friends for helping me out this evening. I want to also explain just a little bit about this covenant. I'm not going to use my own words because they're inadequate. And that's one of the reasons why I asked some of the friends that have been speaking this weekend to help me out on this topic. It's such an important topic. And in fact, it's the major theme of this 6-year global development plan that the Baha'is are now engaged in. You know, the Baha'is are not just going, around trying this and trying that. The Universal House of Justice is guiding the Baha'i community step by step, year after year, intelligently and systematically to establish this new world order. And one of the ways that they do this is by giving us guidance in blocks of time. The current block of time that we're in is called the 6-year plan. And the Universal House of Justice wrote recently that the Covenant of Baha'u'llah, the 100th anniversary of the inception of which will be commemorated in 1992, must be the subject of sustained and concentrated study, instituted by the revealer of God's Word in this day to direct and canalize the forces released by His revelation. The covenant in which, in essence, guarantees the continuation of divine guidance after the ascension of the manifestation through the presence in the world of an institution to which all friends must turn. The Universal House of Justice also wrote that so important for the development of the faith at this time is the understanding of the covenant in all its aspects that it has been designated as a major theme of the 6-year plan in all its aspects. So they're encouraging us to deepen the understanding and love of the believers for the covenant, but also to increase their level of conviction and their loyalty to the cause and its institutions. Now, just to start us off here, and I thought what would be a nice thing for this brief moment up here on Saturday night would be to just ask some of these speakers a simple question about the covenant and see what their reply is in just a few minutes. They don't know anything about this. I had told them something, but I changed my mind and I didn't tell them about that. Not true, I'm just joking. But to just start out, it's going to be a mutiny, I think. I also invited our auxiliary board member for protection, really the defender of the covenant in this area, Mrs. Javed Al-Qadam, to be here too, but she had something to attend to family-wise, and I hope that she can make it. If not, well, we'll just have a little extra time for all the other friends. I want to begin this by sharing something that the Universal House of Justice wrote. Just a little basics on the covenant, okay? So we're all straight on this part. A covenant, the Universal House of Justice wrote. A covenant, in the religious sense, is a binding agreement between God and man, whereby God requires of man certain behavior in return for which He guarantees certain blessings, or whereby He gives man certain bounties in return for which He takes from those who accept them an undertaking to behave in a certain way. There is, for example, the greater covenant which every manifestation of God makes with His followers, promising that in the fullness of time a new manifestation will be sent, and taking from them the undertaking to accept Him when this occurs. There is also the lesser covenant that a manifestation of God makes with His followers, that they will accept His appointment, His appointed successor after Him. If they do so, the faith can remain united and pure. If not, the faith becomes divided, and its force spent. It is a covenant of this kind that Baha'u'llah made with his followers regarding Abdu'l-Baha, and that Abdu'l-Baha perpetuated through the administrative order. And that's the covenant, that covenant of Baha'u'llah, that is the major theme of the 6-year plan. And that's the covenant that I want to ask these friends a question about. I want to start with Dr. Hatcher. I have asked Dr. Hatcher if he would share with us a metaphor to help us understand the covenant better. In just a few minutes. Please. Let's see, 7.
7 then.
Do you want to speak here or?
Oh God, a decision. 7 minutes. A metaphor in 7 minutes. I had a very simple one when he asked me this question. He actually told me earlier today that he might ask that question. And I've had one that carried with me for a long time, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it really was very inadequate. But let me use it anyway, because the reason it's inadequate is, as I will explain to you tomorrow morning, a metaphor should be consistent within itself. It should be logical within itself. And I realized that this was an inadequate metaphor, but then the more I thought about it, the more I realized there could be no adequate metaphor to encompass the covenant. In the 23rd Psalm, I got your attention, didn't I? In the 23rd Psalm, there is a vivid portrayal of the crucifixion of Christ. Now the Psalm, of course, is from the Old Testament. How did it know that Christ was going to be crucified? In that same Psalm are the words, "O God, why hast thou forsaken me?" On the cross, Christ uttered something that bewildered Christians even today. "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" He was not in despair, friends. He was about to ascend. He was reminding the Jews that he was fulfilling the prophecy of his coming. That was a crucial link among many metaphorical and prophetic links from the dispensation of Moses to the dispensation of Christ. Christ, as we know, left a repository of images, thief in the night, of prophecies of when he would return in the fullness of time, both as the counselor, which we have come to accept as the coming of Muhammad, and as the coming of the Son of Man, which we know to be Baha'u'llah. These are links in the covenant that each prophet brings to guide his followers, so that each time a manifestation appears, there is a judgment of those who use the poetic process, who are able to discern in these metaphorical statements the truth of the coming of the prophet. These links form a chain, and there's the metaphor that I would like to leave you. A chain from the earth to the eternal kingdom, to the Baha'i kingdom, in the sense that the link from manifestation to manifestation is the unbroken chain of God's fidelity to humankind, unending in the past and unending in the future. But more crucial to us as Baha'is is that we have access to, in our writings, every link in that chain from the Bab to the House of Justice, from which we get our guidance for today. All of the documents, all of the historical events. And notice, covenant breaking occurs at each of those crucial links. The transition from the Bab to Baha'u'llah. Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan instigates in Mirza Yahya the desire to think that, aha, here's an opportunity. And when Baha'u'llah leaves his will and testament, Sayyid Mirza Muhammad Ali sees an opportunity. And when Abdu'l-Baha dies and appoints the guardian, others see an opportunity to leap in at that leap, because that is the point where we are judged in the covenant, at these points of linkage. So to me, I always envision the covenant as an unbroken chain. But there's another aspect to it, and here's where the inconsistency comes in, and maybe you can help me tonight and give me the answer tomorrow. It relates to us, and that is each of us has the power to break that chain for ourselves. The chain remains intact, but for us it is broken as soon as we reject a prophet or reject one of those crucial links in the continuity of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. One final image, metaphor. Repeatedly throughout the writings of Baha'u'llah is this image of clinging to a cord. I don't know if you've noticed how many times he uses this image, cling to the cord of, and sometimes he'll use my attributes, his attributes of my loving kindness. Cling to the cord, cling to the cord. I don't know how you interpret that, but to me, it's that chain again, the chain of the covenant. And I'm always hanging on the very end in my mind. And that's the only thing that's keeping me safe, is the degree to which I cling to that covenant. Because below me, in my mind, there's a pit of alligators. That's how I think of it. We're just hanging on by that thread, by that chain, is the covenant. Thank you.
That was a beautiful bit. There are so many, and those who are, I think, are going to leave us with a nice image in our mind. Well, now I'd like to ask Claudius a question about how will greater firmness in this covenant help improve the condition of the fund?
I always love it when you have the Universal House of Justice define anything. Because what you get is a kind of definition that is not only comprehensive, but it is eternal. When you look at the way they define a covenant, in that letter that Steve just read to us, there is a very simple connection to it. That one, it is an agreement between God and man. God promised you something, and in return, you have your part of that contract to fulfill. Now, let us go back a little bit to the time that we became Baha'is. If you remember very well, part of what we did was the fact that we decided that we will obey all the laws of Baha'u'llah. Now, that is the main aspect of that contract that we signed. Now, along with that, becoming a Baha'i, there is a requirement that you do not just become a Baha'i only on a piece of a declaration card. You have to live the life of a Baha'i. And then when we go back to a lot of the letters that the Universal House of Justice has written, in their definition of living a Baha'i life, there are a whole long list of things that we have to do. Part of it, when we talk about loving each other and everything else, you have to pray every day. You have to read from the holy books every day. give to the fund. But I will still say the most important thing, you have to teach. That is a cornerstone. Now, let's think of giving to the fund. In my own mind, and I don't want to impose my mind on any of you, I think one of the basic problems that we have with the fund is the fact that it has to do with money. We forget the fact, that the Baha'i Fund and the National Treasury Service is not a department. The Baha'i Fund is an institution. Just like you have the National Spiritual Assembly, the local Spiritual Assembly, and all the other institutions of the faith. You have the Baha'i Fund. And if you obey all of those institutions, why don't you obey the law about the National Fund? And Baha'u'llah may be very easy for all of us. And it was explicitly explained by Abdul Baha, by Shoghi Effendi, and often repeated by the Universal House of Justice. You don't have to be rich to participate in this. So you don't have any excuse. If you are rich, fine. You have the option to participate to any level you want. But the most important thing is that it is an obligation to participate. Don't worry about anybody dropping a $2.5 million check. If all you have is just 10 cents, go ahead and do it. That is just the joy of the whole thing. That's what we call the universal participation. Now, we cannot tell you that you have to do this, but it is an obligation for us. We don't have a choice of whether we can do this or we cannot do that. The only choice we have is the freedom for us to be able to participate to our level. There was a statement, actually a quotation from the Holy Quran that we used in the feast letter about a month ago. It says something about God does not want the whole of you. If he wants the whole of you, don't you think he will get it? But he doesn't want the whole of you. All he wants is a part of your substance, part of what he has given you. It's a test. We do that for little kids. When you have a baby, you give a baby something, they cling to it, like they're never going to part with this anymore. But they get to a point that that kid, in a very loving way, reach out to you and give something that is very dear to him or her and just give it to you in return. We do that. We all see that as parents. We all see that as adults. It happens. So, when we go back to know that it is part of the day-to-day living of a Baha'i to support the faith, it becomes part of that covenant because you are not performing all of the little fine prints of that contract. If you're doing everything else and you're not participating in the fund. Thank you.
Now, I'd like to ask, our next speaker is my beloved wife. And I know her as such a wonderful mother, it occurred to me to ask her a question about helping children understand the importance of the covenant. How is this done? How do we help children understand?
Very good question. I have been trying to find the answer for the past 8 years since we have had our first child. And I think it's about time to know the answer for it. I can share a few of the personal experience with 2 of the children we have. I try to tell them the stories about Abdul-Baha, because Abdul-Baha is the center of covenant. And I think that is one way. Another way, as you know, in our writing, there's so much emphasis on teaching the children about the love of God and the fear of God, right from their childhood. And of course, about the love of God, you can just look at the nature and remind them that everything that they see around them is created by God. And everything that they have, all the blessings in their life, is from love of God. And I think fear of God, again from writings of Abdul-Baha, I teach them that fear of God is not that God is cruel. I explain to them that God is just. So that's why they have to have a fear of God. And I think the institutions, children classes and the Baha'i summer schools, they can be a great help. 2 months ago, we went to the Iowa summer school, and the theme for the children classes, it was the covenant. And on the way back home, I asked our children that, what did you learn in your children classes? Say about covenant. So what's that mean? And I have a covenant with my son that I don't mention his name right now. It cost me $1. And he gave me a beautiful answer. He said, the covenant, when you make it, you can't break it. And I thought that was beautiful, what he learned during the class for 3 days. Thank you.
Paul Lample from the National Center staff. I've asked Paul to answer this question. How can understanding the covenant and the power of the covenant make us better teachers?
I don't have the slightest idea. I just want to point out how unfair this is. Steve has all these notes. That's not us, man. He doesn't make this up. I think if you're a teacher, if you're somebody who's trying to teach about the Baha'i faith, there's really no better partner that you could have than the covenant, because the covenant makes the whole thing quite easy. It does the whole job for you, so it makes it simple. First of all, the covenant gives you an incredible package that you're taking along with you to tell people about. Shoghi Effendi talks about the purposes of Baha'u'llah's covenant, and he says one of the things that it does is to protect the integrity of the faith. Make sure that the teachings that came from Baha'u'llah, and the book that he brought, and the interpretations by Abdul-Baha and Shoghi Effendi, and now the guidance from the Universal House of Justice, all comes to us in its pure form, uncontaminated by individuals' opinions. In the past, after the messenger came, there wasn't any one center that people could turn to say, this is what he meant, or this is how we understand it, or even to make sure that what was passed down about what he said was really what he said. And so that's one of the things that the covenant does. It also protects the unity of the faith. Where in the world are you going to find a power that can unify people of different races, of religions, of nations, to create the oneness of the entire human family? That's what the covenant does. So that again adds to this attractive message that you bring along with you. Then the covenant creates these institutions. The administrative order is the child of the covenant. And so this whole administrative structure is the crystallization of the power that Baha'u'llah released. The covenant essentially is a kind of an irrigation channel. It takes this great power that Baha'u'llah brought and it channels it. Instead of having just gentle rainfall all around the whole place, if you want to grow a certain apple tree and get fruit, you have an irrigation channel, you bring that water right to that plant. And that's what the covenant does. So it creates this channel for all this power that Baha'u'llah brought and brings it right on tap to the building of this new civilization that Baha'u'llah wanted to bring. Creating these institutions that are all about teaching. And so there's all that guidance for the teacher as well, including the plans that come from the Universal House of Justice, which, as Steve talked about before, is our systematic step-by-step plan of how to get the teaching job done. The second thing the covenant does is it prepares the people that you're taking the message to. Abdu'l-Baha said that the covenant is like the light of the sun. It quickens, it creates the generating spirit which makes things grow. So the covenant is preparing the ground, quickening people. Abdu'l-Baha also said that the heat of the covenant, the heat of the light of the sun, is the educator of the minds and the spirits of humanity. So that process is taking place as well. In one of his tablets, Abdu'l-Baha talks about Paris to the early Baha'is, and he said that the garment of materialism has spread itself over Paris. But he said that if the standard of the covenant is raised, then Paris will burst into flame. So this creative, powerful force is working on all the people that Baha'is have to take the message to. So one, you've got this perfect package that assists you in delivering the message and is something that's attracting people. Two, it prepares the people to hear what you have to say. Three, it assists you. As Claudius talked about, when you enter into this contract with Baha'u'llah and you carry out the things he asks you to do, to pray, to read from the writings, to live a Baha'i life, manifest these qualities, these divine qualities that all of the messengers of God have talked to us about, then that makes you something attractive. It makes you part of that irrigation channel. Shoghi Effendi said that we ourselves can become instruments. So just as the covenant is an instrument to direct and canalize these forces of the revelation, then when we as teachers kind of plug into that, we're a continuation of that channel. And so the power of the Holy Spirit flows through us and does the teaching. It's not you who has to do it. And then if all these things weren't enough, these 3 points, the fourth thing is that the covenant does the whole job itself. Shoghi Effendi outlines a number of things that the covenant has done. He says, for example, that it was the power of the covenant that released Abdu'l-Baha from captivity so that he could go and travel to the West and overthrew the regime of Sultan Hamid, who was holding him prisoner. He also talked about the idea that it was the covenant of Baha'u'llah that brought into being the American Baha'i community. Within 1 year after that covenant was established, the faith began in the American Baha'i community. And so even the exploits of the early believers and the spread of the faith throughout the world were all attributed to the power of the covenant. So in these 4 ways, the covenant does the whole job. Just as the House of Justice said in the 1988 Rizvan message, that the power of the covenant will assist you and remove all the obstacles in your path.
share with you another thought. And that is that it seems, according to Shoghi Effendi, our beloved guardian, all of the principles that we talk about so often as Baha'is, all of these principles of equality of men and women and universal language and universal education and a world government and so on, all of these principles revolve around one pivot. And that pivot is the oneness of mankind. You know how we have this example in our Baha'i faith? An example that is sort of almost like a symbol, almost like a metaphor. It's like this idea that Abdu'l-Baha told us about the Mashruq al-Azkar, you know, the house of worship, the dawning place of the mention of God, and how in the middle of every town in the future, at the center of every village and city, will be the house of worship. And around the house of worship, as Claudius mentioned earlier, there will be these dependencies. The orphanage, the home for the aged, and the universities, and the hospice for travelers, and libraries, and administrative buildings, and so on. But in the center, there will be this essentially spiritual building, a building for spiritual functions only, for praying and mentioning God and praising God and thanking God and so on. No other reason. Just for this spiritual function. But around it will be all these dependencies that will attend to the social and practical aspects of life. So at the core of the city will be the spiritual, and around it will be all of the social and practical aspects of life. Now, it seems that it's sort of like Nadjla mentioned earlier today, that in the Baha'i faith, this form follows the spirit. In the middle, as a pivot of all our social teachings, Shoghi Effendi said, is the pivot of the oneness of mankind. This principle of the oneness of mankind is the pivot around which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve. I just found this quotation from one of the tablets of Abdu'l-Baha. He said, "It is indubitably clear that the pivot of the oneness of mankind is nothing else but the power of the covenant." So all of the teachings revolve around this one pivot, and that is the oneness of mankind. And the pivot of the oneness of mankind is the power of the covenant. It's at the very core of our faith. The Universal House of Justice wrote, "The progress of the cause of God gathers increasing momentum, and we may with confidence look forward to the day when this community, in God's good time, shall have traversed the stages predicted for it by its guardians, and shall have raised on this tormented planet the fair mansions of God's own kingdom, wherein humanity may find surcease from its self-induced confusion and chaos and ruin. And the hatreds and violence of this time shall be transmuted into an abiding sense of world brotherhood and peace." That's our dearest wish. All of this shall be accomplished within the covenant of the everlasting Father, the covenant of Baha'u'llah. The power of the covenant, Abdu'l-Baha wrote, is as the heat of the sun, which quickeneth and promoteth the development of all created things on earth. The light of the covenant, in like manner, is the educator of the minds, the spirits, the hearts, and souls of men. I'd like to close this portion with a prayer for firmness in the covenant for all of us. O compassionate God, thanks be to Thee, for Thou hast awakened and made me conscious. Thou hast given me a seeing eye and favored me with a hearing ear. Hast led me to Thy kingdom and guided me to Thy path. Thou hast shown me the right way and caused me to enter the ark of deliverance. O God, keep me steadfast and make me firm and staunch. Protect me from violent tests and preserve and shelter me in the strongly fortified fortress of thy covenant and testament. Thou art the powerful, thou art the seeing, thou art the hearing. O thou, the compassionate God, bestow upon me a heart which, like unto a glass, may be illumined with the light of thy love, and confer upon me thoughts which may change this world into a rose garden through the outpourings of heavenly grace. Thou art the compassionate, the merciful, thou art the great beneficent God. Thank you for your attentiveness, and thank you to the panel members.
First of all, I would like to say one thing.